My question is around educational spending. We have a lot of issues with infrastructure at inner city school level, and my question is, rather than proposing to raise taxes and find more ways to fund the educational system, how do you propose allocating funding toward the inner city schools in the country, in the U.S., and how do you propose to do that better? And secondly, how do you propose to involve corporations and the corporate community in helping solve America's educational problems?
Is this the camera that's transmitting to them? We have millions of children that are not being trained to compete in this new global economy, but also aren't being trained, as you said, to be the kinds of citizens that we need to make our democracy work. So here's what I would do. Number one, I want to make early childhood education available for every young person, because that's how we're going to close the achievement gap that's particularly important in urban communities where there's a lot of low-income folks. It's also important in rural communities. We have to get our children prepared on the first day they get to school, and that means working not just with pre-K, but also from birth to 3, working with parents to make sure that they are reading to their kids, that children are getting the kinds of basic support that they need. We then need to, I think, across the board, increase teacher salaries, because that's part of how we're going to be able to recruit an entire army, a new generation of teachers as baby boomers retire. We have to combine that with better training for new teachers so that they stay in the classroom and they get the best practices that they need. And we have to work with them, not against them, to raise standards in the schools. We can't have a bill called No Child Left Behind that leaves the money behind, but also creates a system of assessment that's reliant on just one standardized test, and often labels schools as failures, even though they're doing a good job, because it doesn't take into account where kids are coming from, and that disproportionately affects rural and urban communities. Last point, we have to make college affordable and accessible to all young people, and I want to make sure that new teachers are able to work off their debts each and every year that they teach, particularly in rural schools and urban schools that are hard to teach, so that we are able to get young people going where they're most needed.
All right, the first thing I would like to ask before I get into my question is, Sarah Obama, are you fired up?
I'm fired up and I'm ready to go.
All right, my name is Alex Edwards. I'm 20 years old. I'm the Vice President of the Student Government Association here at Wake Tech, and I would like to know, what would you do to stop the flow of illegal drugs into our public schools and our country?
Well, here's what I would do. The first thing is to understand that we do have to have a law enforcement component, and I already mentioned the issue of methamphetamines, which is ravaging rural communities in Iowa, in Illinois, and all across the Midwest. And unfortunately, we've seen cuts from the federal government in some of the law enforcement dollars that could help. Burns grants that are used by local districts that may not be able to afford to have their own internal law enforcement drug task force by themselves. Using some of these federal funds, they've been able to combine forces and hire somebody to help on the enforcement side. Those programs have been consistently cut by the Bush administration. They're going to be restored and increased under an Obama administration. But that's on the law enforcement side. We're going to have to do something about demand. And young people resort to drugs because there's a void that needs to be filled, because the schools are not doing what they need to do for the children, because economic opportunities appear to be lacking, and so when kids look out at their future, they don't see the prospects of the kinds of careers and jobs that will allow them to support a family. And there aren't enough mental health services and health care services, particularly in rural communities, that can be accessed. So we have to improve our schools, provide economic development in rural communities that tie jobs to schools so that people know that they